When cops arrived at a Wisconsin crime scene to find an average middle-aged white man who had been snuffed, their first thought wasn't that he was a voodoo cult leader who planned his own execution to sacrifice his soul to his right-hand man and give insurance money to his wife. But over time, that's what they found out. Welcome to Crazy Town. In July of 1997, a driver found a body lying limp on the side of the road in Douglas County, Wisconsin, and reported it to the police. Officers rushed to the scene and began to investigate. They concluded the body was of a middle-aged white man who was wearing all white, which they found extremely odd. Shirt, pants, belt, shoes, the whole shebang. There was a red stain on the man's chest, which was where they concluded he was fatally hit with bullets at a very close range. Well, it didn't take long to identify this man as 45-year-old Mark Stephen Foster because police officers found his passport on him. It's like someone wanted this man's identity to be discovered. During the initial crime scene investigation, detectives could confidently say they knew Mark was slain by someone else, and whoever did it made no effort to hide the body. While Mark's body was sent off for an autopsy, officials decided to look things up about him to find out why someone might be out to get him and who. In their research, they found out that Mark was a pharmacist at a drug emporium in St. Paul, Minnesota. He also owned a private company called Quanta Press. After doing some digging, detectives said it seemed like Mark was a well-liked person. One of his friends and employees said, "When I met Mark, I could tell he was different from everyone else. Mark was definitely magnetic. He definitely drew people into him." But for the way Mark was snuffed, there had to be more to the story. He had to have drama with someone, right? During Mark's autopsy, examiners discovered a note in one of his shoes that read, "Jack Frazier isn't here, but it's Jimmy Bailey," or look-alike. In the other shoe, there was another note that said, "Geez, it's 3 Tufts. Hope I'm okay." What the heck? Who else is hella confused? Well, detectives didn't really know what to think of the notes either, but they definitely had some names to look into. Around the same time, officers found out that Mark was reported missing by his 29-year-old nephew Brent on July 18th, the same day he was found lifeless on the side of the road. Based on the state of Mark's body, it seemed like he was iced that day, so investigators were a bit skeptical of Brent reporting his uncle's disappearance so early. But the more detectives looked into Mark's life, the more they found out how messy it really was. So Mark lived with his new wife Sarah, his nephew Brent, and another roommate Gregory. A few months before marrying Mark, Sarah broke up with her former boyfriend, which absolutely blindsided him. Apparently, her BF was coming home from a road trip, and Sarah told him to expect a pot roast dinner waiting for him at home. But when he got there was no pot roast dinner and no Sarah. She had already moved in with Mark. Oh, and here's the craziest part. Sarah's ex-boyfriend's name was Jack Frazier, the same name written in one of the notes found in Mark's shoes. Oh snap. Sarah was also pregnant at the time of Mark's execution, and I'm going to assume it was Mark's baby, so maybe that's one of the reasons she married him and left Jack. During an interview with the police, Sarah said the last time she saw Mark was the afternoon before he was found. Brent said he last saw his uncle around 2 o'clock the following morning. He also said Mark was in a bit of an argument with Jack over Sarah. He told officers that Mark was going to meet Jack at a country kitchen restaurant to try and straighten things out. Oh. I wonder if that's where Mark went right before he disappeared. He could have gotten into a fight with Jack that escalated too quickly. Mark's roommate Gregory told detectives that Jack knew Mark was a pharmacist, and he apparently threatened to snuff Mark and his family if he didn't get him some substances. Why was Jack all in Mark's business like that? This is all so strange to me. Oh, and the other name written in the note was Jimmy Bailey. He was also one of Sarah's exes, but this one was an ex-husband. Apparently, Jimmy and Sarah were in a nasty custody battle, so it seemed like both he and Jack would have a motive to go after Mark. Even though it seems like Sarah was the one who screwed them over, going after the new guy is a pretty common thing. But when Jack and Jimmy were questioned, they denied being involved in Mark's execution. Jack said he had issues with Sarah and Mark, but they were never bad enough to lead him to do something as awful as slaying Mark. Jimmy said pretty much the same thing, and both men had legit alibis, so off the suspect list they went. And it was back to square one for the detectives. Over time, it was revealed that Mark had a lot of intimate relationships going on with young people, and it's reported that Brent, Sarah, and Gregory were all in on it too. When Brent and Sarah were initially interviewed by the police, they didn't really seem fazed by Mark's demise, and they never even asked how he was slain either. At that point, detectives started to speculate that Brent or Sarah may have been involved in the crime. The fact that they never asked about how Mark was snuffed led investigators to believe that they either didn't care or already knew. After securing the warrant, officers looked through Mark's home where they found a bunch of kinky adult items that seemed to confirm his many relationships. But that was only the beginning, because when officials checked the attic, things got much crazier. So the attic was painted in bright neon colors, and the walls and floors were covered in red splotches that appeared to be from vital fluid. While the investigators were looking up there, they found their own business cards. Whoa, that's wild. Maybe one of Mark's roommates was pissed about the search, so they decided to tease the investigators a bit? It's not very clear, but from everything the officers ended up finding in Mark's attic, they came to the conclusion that he practiced voodoo and was a Santaro, which is a high priest in the religion of Santeria. OMG, I never would have guessed that. So Santeria is a blend of West African religion and Catholicism with a sprinkle of voodoo and Caribbean philosophy. The religion is centered around building relationships between humans and orishas, which are manifestations of God. In order to stay in contact with their spirit guides, followers will perform rituals like dancing, drumming, speaking, and eating with orishas, as well as sacrificing animals. Santeria was developed by slaves and is most commonly practiced by their descendants and others in the West Indies. So then how did this white businessman get involved? Well, the cult does have a presence in the US, and it most often spreads by word of mouth, so maybe Mark met someone from that faith and decided to follow their lead. And after Mark converted, he started spreading the good word to other people. He actually recruited his roommate Gregory when he met him at a bookstore in the Twin Cities. Gregory joined the faith and became Mark's right-hand man. But the most shocking thing about the Santeria faith is that the followers believe they can transfer their consciousness into another person. In order to do so, the person on the receiving end of the exchange has to snuff the person whose soul they want to take. Turns out our boy Mark planned to slay his mentor, a high Santeria priest in New Orleans, which meant he would assume his leader's power and move up in the ranks. That would also mean Gregory would move up on the totem pole and be next in line to take Mark's title. Oh, so maybe Gregory got a bit excited by the thought of being head honcho and iced his roomie? As much as that sounds like the case, detectives weren't able to find sufficient enough evidence to prove that theory. The main piece of evidence they had was the rifle that was used on Mark. When investigators talked to Mark's son Jeremy, oh yeah, I forgot to mention this earlier, but Mark had 2 sons from a previous marriage. One of them, Jeremy, said Mark had a .44 caliber rifle, which was the same one used to end his life. When officials went to the storage locker that Mark kept his firearm in, it was empty. But they were able to determine from the security log and video surveillance footage that Mark went into his storage unit the night before he was found on the road. This led them to believe that Mark is the one who got the rifle. He picked up the instrument of his own demise? That's unusual. But if there's anything to know about true crime stories, it's that they're far from usual. It's possible that Mark wanted to use the firearm on himself to end his own life that way, but the way his wounds were, it was clear someone else pulled the trigger. But what if Mark got someone else to pull the trigger for him? Buckle up, things are about to get real bumpy. Turns out that Mark was in a lot of debt and his business was falling apart. His friend and employee James said he was not reinvesting in the company. He was not keeping up with the changes in the industry. He had good ideas, but he was selling himself like he was selling his products as something far greater and far wild and innovative than they were. Around the time Mark's career and finances were going down the drain, he took out a $100,000 life insurance policy with Unum Life Insurance Company of America. That March, he made the beneficiary his new wife, Sarah. 3 months later, Mark took out another life insurance policy. This time, it was for $300,000 from State Farm. He made his beneficiaries Brent and Gregory. And that's when the detectives started to piece everything together. Insurance companies don't pay out when people take their own life, but if they were to be slain by someone else and left lifeless on the side of a freeway, that's a different story. He did not. Detectives then revisited the way Mark was found. He was wearing all white, which could have been a ceremonial thing. You know, like Mark wanted to dress up for the passing of his consciousness to Gregory. And it was also strange that his passport was on him. Most people don't just walk around town with their passports on a daily basis, which meant Mark wanted to be discovered immediately so his insurance money could be cashed in on. And the notes in his shoes were probably written to frame Sarah's exes for obvious reasons. But as certain as the investigators were about their theory, they still had no real evidence. They couldn't find the firearm, there was no incriminating DNA evidence, and there were no witnesses who came forward. With that, the case went cold for about 18 months. But one day, Brent came into the police station and confessed to everything. He said Mark manipulated him and Gregory into slaying him for his insurance money, and for Gregory, he would also move up in the rankings of their cult. Brent said Mark was the one who wrote the notes and stuffed them in his own shoes. Although Brent was there when the whole thing went down, he claimed Gregory was the one who used the rifle on Mark, delivering the fatal blow to his chest. Because if you remember, in order for Gregory to get Mark's soul, or status or whatever, he'd have to be the one to do it. Does this religion say anything about thou shalt not slay or something? I feel like most religions don't encourage the execution of other humans. After the deed was done, Brent and Gregory went to the St. Croix River where they threw the rifle in the water and just waited for the notification of Mark's passing so they could get that insurance moolah. You know, even though the cops kind of had that theory going for a while, I bet it was still shocking AF when their speculations were confirmed. And after Brent came forward with the truth, Gregory ended up confessing to his role in the crime. He also told them about the insurance money and his voodoo powers. But then the investigators were kind of like, okay, so they're guilty, but since Mark is the one who planned it, how do we even charge these guys? It was one of those rare cases where yes, Gregory and Brent probably shouldn't have agreed to carry out Mark's plan, but he would have found a way to do it sooner or later, right? And they might as well participate to get a cut of the money and level up in the voodoo world. Well, in 2002, Gregory was charged for the crime and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Since Brent cooperated with the police, he was sentenced to just 3 years in prison. During the sentencing, one of Mark's kids apparently stood up and asked the judge to be lenient with Brent's sentencing. They said it was already hard enough to lose their dad, they didn't want to lose their cousin too. Dang. And the judge was all like, all right, kid, whatever you say. Brent also wasn't the one who directly whacked Mark, so that probably had something to do with his sentence reduction. As for Sarah, she was never charged, and her level of involvement is pretty up in the air, although insurance investigators and police officers think she definitely knew what was going on. According to court records, Sarah met some girl at a bar in January of 1996 and started dating her. And look, I'm all about free love here, but Sarah seems to be playing quite a few people in her life. Anyway, Sarah told her alleged GF that she found a really neat religion and said that Mark had lots of money, so if anything ever happened, she would be taken care of. It was also revealed that Mark filmed a farewell video before his big event where he dedicated specific messages to Sarah, his unborn child that she was carrying, and his 2 kids that he had from his previous relationship. Honestly, this video was a whole one-man show where he sang, played culty songs on his harmonica, talked about being reunited with his ancestors. It was like a whole production. But the question that remains unknown is whether or not this was a religious rite, a crazy insurance scam, or just out of Mark's pure desire to exit the world, but make it a show. While we know the details of Mark's religion and his beliefs, it's hard to tell if that really was the reason he orchestrated everything. Yeah, I don't think Santeria says anything about snuffing your mentor and making sure they sign over their insurance money to you. Actually, there is no official text to the Santeria religion, so it's almost like a bit of a free-for-all. So maybe Mark did it all to get him and his family out of debt and leave behind a nice sum for the people he loved? But that would be soup's awk, because in 2001, a federal court ruled that the insurance companies didn't need to pay out Mark's benefits because there's this thing called the Slayer Rule, which says criminals can't inherit from the person they snuff. Oops, I bet no one thought of that. Although it did seem like Mark had other issues that may have led him to do what he did. In the many hours of research investigators poured into this case, they found out that Mark was under investigation by the FBI on charges relating to inappropriate photos of children. Mark claimed his girlfriend made the whole thing up and framed him, but it's not clear what happened with the charges. Either way, that's another reason why Mark may have wanted to exit the world. The biggest thing holding me up is how none of Mark's loved ones thought to intervene and try to convince him out of his plan. Mark's ex-wife Nancy said in an interview, "Mark could make you feel like someone special. I think somehow he convinced them. They were adults. They could have said no. They could have tried to steer Mark into some other kind of solution." And that's so true. While I think Mark was very set on this event going down, it doesn't seem like there was anyone who thought to stop him or seek help for him. It's a pretty loaded situation.